Right, so this is your second due date of the third week, and yes, you should be taking notes. So from the time I recorded the first video that you watched for this week, I've been working on something that should not have taken very long, but ended up taking longer than I thought. Which happens. I guess that's the point of my whole discussion to begin with here is that sometimes things just take a little longer and you have to be willing to stick it out. And that's really what we call grit, the ability and the desire and the drive to just stick with things. Because there was a couple times when I did what appeared to or should have been in my head simple, took a little bit longer. And when I was just at that moment where I forget it, I'll find a new way to do it. I stepped back, I thought about it, I approached it in a new way, I kind of calmed down, and then it was easier. And I think that's the point is that when we get stressed about things, it just makes it harder. So when you catch yourself in that place that you're just like kind of the more tense you get, to me, the less our brains help us out. So allow your brain to help you by remaining calm because, and if you're not, step away for a while, take a break, go do something else, okay, and then come back to it. All right, so here's what happened for me was that what you're going to do this week is you're going to do the HTML essential training that I talked about on Monday's video because the more I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, this is just good knowledge to have. And I'm going to have you do it in what's called a code along method, not in a taking notes method. And I think this is really valuable. But in order to do that, because we haven't introduced Git, which you will GIT, not GET, Git, which is a version control, we're going to end up using Google Drive to do that. So we have to, and you're going to end up creating a directory under the lecture, which I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. And in doing that, you have to have an editor locally being able to recognize that Google Drive, okay? And so the reason I ended up taking a little longer than I thought was because I run Windows inside of my Mac, and inside of that Windows virtualized system, I couldn't get the Google Drive set up. And I couldn't figure out why it wasn't recognizing my system. And it ended up being that my resolution was set so low that I couldn't see the install. And that took me longer than I had hoped it would have. But again, that's kind of the point. So let's go ahead and turn to the work and actually show you, at least walk you through how I got it done. I can't show you all the steps because I ended up having to walk through them to get to the place that you'll see, but in general, okay? So in our course, I've changed the order of things for this item, okay, for this due date. So I'm going to have you select your editor first. And as I previewed in last time, I'm going to use VS Code. And you can use whatever you want. I think some of you will use VS Code just because I am, and maybe because of what we're about to do, you may end up going to VS Code even if you love something else. It's really about if you can get this next step done. And regardless of if you already have an editor you love, being able to use any kind of editor in front of you is a good thing. Okay? So first thing you'll do is select your editor, and then in your editor you'll need to have set up this Google Drive and backup sync so that your local system can have access to your Google Drive. Okay, so I'm going to first show you on the Mac and then I'll switch over and show you this on the PC side. So on my Mac side, I just have Google Drive set up in my directory or in my Finder, and that comes from installing that Google backup plugin, sync plugin. And then what I can do here is just see that because I have the directory and then I have the shared with Rio, okay, and then I have a directory called code up here. Now this is the same as, and I'm just going to show you here, I'm going to go to Drive, okay. So what you can do is you can create the folder first, no matter what operating system you're on, okay. So what I did here is I went into my 82, and then I went into my shared with Rio, And then in here, and this was just something I was playing around with, I created a code up directory. Okay, so now I haven't done anything here yet because I'll just give you, walk you through what you're going to need to do. But basically, you're just going to follow along with what he does in the lecture and just code, because most of the lecture for the lynda.com in here is him coding. And he does give you exercise files, but those you can look at if you're having trouble trying to understand what that code was. But the idea is that you're actually going to do the work. And there are some other challenges in here that I don't require that I think are good for you for understanding. And so what you'll want to do here, and look, there's actually one right here, I think. No, it's actually a challenge, and you'll go through these, and so you'll code along, or code up actually is the term that I'm using. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to this. So here is the code up directory. So now, because I have it on Google Drive, like I was showing you before, I needed to have it on my local system. So I'm just going to go ahead. I have VS Code already loaded, and that's part of what you're going to have to do, because the first thing I have you do this week is actually do the hands-on and figure out which editor you're going to use. But once you do that, I'm just going to give you a basic VS Code session here, okay? Because once you get there, you'll come to a welcome, and there's some great info in here. Check it out. You won't see any recent unless you are already using VS Code. But in this case, I'm going to open it here, or click on, because here's a search. This is for version control. These are for adding add-ons and extensions, debugging, source control. But again, most of what we'll use is just really in the editor, and it's very clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open, again on Mac, I'm going to open a folder, and then on the folder I'm going to go to my Google Drive. Okay, I'm going to search for that CIT82. I'm going to search for the shared with Rio. I'm going to search for code up, and then I'll open that folder. Okay, so now that I'm in that folder, and it might take it a minute in order to show up here, because it is actually having to go across the wire of wherever that's at. It looks like I already have it open. So now that I'm in here, now I can create files, right? So this is where, right? So I want you to code along with the exercises that you have. So one thing you can do, and this might be kind of a good way to do it, is I'm actually, now that I'm in here, going to create one called Week 3. Okay, so that's another folder, and then within that Week 3, then I'll code along with whatever he's creating. Okay, now let me just show you this because I want you to see this. It'll probably create an index file or something like that. That's a very typical file. I'm going to use something called emit here to quickly create just a basic structure so you can see this. I have my VS Code set up so it automatically saves, so I don't have to. But here's what I want to show you is because, and notice that already showed up. Boom, it just popped right in, right? So now that file is up here. And so the other thing is, the reason I like this is that it's a version control, so I can actually see the code that you're writing, and in the process you're writing it. Right now, I'd have to go through, and this is what you'll do, is go through, and he'll have you name particular documents, and if you want to organize this a little differently, that's cool too, as long as I see a code up directory. But again, you'll give me a link into this directory, right? This directory right here, and you can just do it in your notes, right? So by the way, right now you should be working on class topics, but when you get into the lecture, all you'll have to do in the lecture part of this week is just give me a link to your code up directory. Okay, that's all you have to do. And again, you can organize this however you want, depending on what he's having you do. But just to be clear, let's go back here. So I know that's a lot right there, so kind of digest that a little bit. So the first thing you'll do is select your editor, do that, and then we'll get into actually doing some work in your editor. But before you do that, you have to load in that that Google Drive backup and sync. Oh, and I'm going to actually show you a little more about that on the Windows side in a minute, because once you install that, then what you'll do is go through a process of selecting. Well, actually, let's switch over to Windows, and then I'll show you that over there. Okay, but just a step here before we go. So here are the items you need to complete, which is the introduction. And now, if there's nothing there coding, then you're not responsible for for note taking in this case. All you're responsible for is the code part, but I recommend watching intro because I don't think there's code there. But on intro, introducing HTML, web basic page structure, and the formatting the content, complete those three in your code along directory. Okay? All right, so I'm going to switch. That's what you need to do, but I'm going to switch to my virtualized Windows environment here. Okay, and what I ended up doing is once I installed that, and let me just find it right here. Right, so once I downloaded and installed that backup and sync, then it walked me through a process that allowed me. On the Windows side, I had to do this. On the Mac side, not so much. And by the way, even on the Mac side, I had to install the app, but it wasn't as hard of a process as it seemed to be on the Windows side. But once I did that, then it just walked me through a process so that I could tell Windows, here's the drive I want to back up and sync. Okay, so now on VS Code, on the Windows side, it'll look similar once you have that set up. Okay, so you can see, and I'll just do this here, is I'll open folder, but on this side, I can go into my Google Drive, and then I've already set this up to sync it so that when I come into here, shared with Rio, code up. Actually, what I do, sorry, one back. I would just go there and then open that folder. Okay. But as far as the functionality of the app itself, right, it's the same basic thing. Close this. Looks like VS Code came out with a 32-bit version, which is totally awesome. So it's good. Okay, there it is. Okay, so then here I could see, and it'll take a minute. The reason this is taking a minute, and I think I could do a refresh here, because it's having to, on the Windows side, go across the wire, go into my drive, and pull up those changes that I've done. So it might take a minute, but again, you shouldn't have this because I'm switching between Windows and Mac here, and it's just taking a little while for the Windows side to catch up. But the key to this is that you have to install that app, right? So let me go back just to show you. So it's the backup and sync, and again, it'll install based on whichever operating system you're using, and then it shows you how it integrates with your system, and then you just select what on Google Drive you want to sync. But again, I found that just much easier on the Mac side than the Windows side. Okay, I hope that helps you at least understand conceptually. If you have any questions, again, reach out. But the last item we have, okay, so again, when you're submitting that HTML and CSS, or the HTML, what's it called? HTML Essential Training, Part 1, you just give me a link into your code up directory. And then the last item we have, which is really just fundamental to understanding, like there's web hosts, right? And I told you before, we will end up using GitHub for our web hosting needs for this class. In the past, I actually have used web hosting companies. They gave me some free space to use for students. We were using something called FTP, File Transfer Protocol, which you've been introduced to in a couple of the videos. But in our case, I've moved away from traditional web hosting, and I'm actually using GitHub as a way to introduce us to Git itself. And here, let me just show you. This is a preview of what's to come. We will end up installing Git locally, and then having a GitHub set up, and then we'll use that to create web pages that are then hosted. And this is please don't go here. You probably will now that I've said it, but this is an example of something that because I set it up the way it asks, and you'll go through this, is you'll have a hosted web site by putting your code up on github.com. Okay, so again, a little bit of a preview of what's coming. So for what I want you to do here is really just go out and search some web hosts, because there are a bunch of options out there today. For web hosting these days, I've been using actually Google's domain, but then I've been using a platform called Firebase, and it gives you free HTTP, which is awesome because most web hosts charge you extra for HTTP, and right now I'm hosting our food business site on there for free until I get to a certain traffic. I just want you to go do some research because there, find some free and a paid option, and then the link, provide links to your fellow classmates about this, and then 150 words in your normal replies here. And then I just gave you a basic video here about web hosting, so it gives you a little more if you need that. Okay, I know there's a lot this week, but this is what I was trying to preview about, also the benefit of working ahead because what I ran into with trying to get Google Drive showing up on my local system so I could have my editor open that file is something you may run into. The sooner you can work on this and get help, the better off you're going to be. So, have a great one. Hope you find this enjoyable because that actually is the idea, is that once you get kind of past making sure the setup's done, now we're actually getting into the more of the fun stuff. And some of you who might concurrently be taking CIT85 along with this course, this is just the concept of introducing it and getting some experience. Todd really teaches you more in depth what HTML, CSS, many of the standards. So this is just a general introduction. That's why we only cover it for 3 weeks, and then we'll move on to other stuff. We'll end up moving on to Bootstrap. Well, we're going to be using Bootstrap 4 to do your project sites for this class. Okay, I know, enough already. See you later.